Alright, so let's be honest here. This wasn't my first choice for a review this week, but I've been putting this one off for a few months just because it's so freaking hard. But once again, due to time constraints, I decided to finally brush all the dust off of my notes and finally review it. Shadow of the Ninja is an action game made by Natsume. You may not have really heard of them, but they also created Shatterhand, one of my favorite NES action games. You play as one of two ninjas that supposedly appear out of thin air. I guess that's how ninjas work, right? I'm going to read to you exactly what the story says in the manual. It reads, and I quote, "It's the year 2029 AD, and a madman controls the largest city in America. The Emperor Garuda and his followers have built an impregnable stronghold as a monument to his evil. Conventional forces have been unable to stop his malevolent plans for total control, but Garuda is worried. Reports have reached him that two figures have breached the outskirts of his city defenses. For the first time, he feels an inner chill, for he knows that invaders are ninjas." End quote. How does he know they're ninjas? Just because they crack his defenses? I don't know, but who the hell cares? We just want to know how the game plays, right? Well, it does a very good job for the most part, but it does have its few minor flaws. First, it's your standard action game with standard controls. I'm not going to focus too much on them because they're easy enough to figure out. The gameplay is fairly easy to pick up as well. You run from one side of the level to the next while avoiding your enemies and slashing them at the same time. The interesting thing is that you have two heroes to choose from. Other than gender, there's really no difference other than the digitized speech naturally changing. That's right, there's actually speech in this game, but it's on the minimal side. Just like Kung Fu, you hear the hi-yas and the such. That's about all you get, but that's not really a bad thing. Would you really want full voiceovers on an NES game? I know I don't. That's like saying you would want a full-length Avenged Sevenfold album to be played from a Sega Genesis. The bass would probably sound awesome, but that's about it. Just because Road Rash can kind of pull it off doesn't mean that it should be attempted. Right from the beginning of the game, after you choose your player, you get thrust into the game. And what an opening stage, you see. You're on a ship that's in the middle of a storm, with enemies running at you. That's pretty cool. None of the stages I was able to get to achieve the same level of detail, but the game as a whole has some very nice visuals, which is the way it should be since it was released later in the NES's lifespan. You won't be disappointed with the level of detail anywhere in the game. Areas go from the ship to some really gritty sewer looking areas, so it's got a little bit of everything. It almost looks like a bit like Batman, doesn't it? I know, I'm comparing this game to a lot of other games, and I don't know why, but I call it as I see it. You do get access to a small variety of weapons. You start off with a sword with meager distance, but if you wish to stay with it, you can find power-ups that increase the length of the attack, making it feel much closer in range to the hook, which is your second weapon you'll encounter. The technical name for the hook, or the sickle and chain if you prefer, is, and forgive me if I pronounce this incorrectly, because I'm in no way Japanese, the Kusarigama. It sounds good to me, so we'll go with that. This weapon has a great range, but you may wish to stay away from it for one simple reason. It's a bit fussy with the hit detection. Basically, in order to hit something with it, you need to time the strike so that the hook actually hits the enemy, not the chain. It's a bit difficult to explain, but even more frustrating when you see it in action. The plus side though, other than the range, is that you can attack above you with it. So what would you rather have? A shorter range, but an easier hit? Or a larger range and an upward attack, but sketchy damage? Of course, you can get ninja stars as well. Usually when you pick these up, you get a small supply. 20 to be exact. They don't seem to be as powerful as they should be though. You get 20 of them. And they're not entirely common, but you often need 2 or 3 of them before an enemy dies. There's even spots where you have to use up 10 of them just to defeat a mandatory mini-boss. You might think, well, Reaper, doesn't the extra range make up for the lack of damage? Well, sometimes, but on occasion they might, but often it feels like they're making the game more difficult, because you're expecting the range difference to make up for the power. However, if you don't anticipate the movements of your enemy, you're just wasting ammo anyway. Now let's get on to the real meat of the game, the difficulty. Holy shit, this game's hard. First off, you get a life meter, which you should be grateful for, but that's about it. You don't really get any lives, but instead 5 continues. Once those are gone, it's back to the title screen with you. There are cliffs in the game, but thankfully they're not an immediate death. Instead, you teleport back up to a safe platform with a large chunk of health missing. Health power-ups aren't exactly plentiful either, so you'll want to save every little bit you can get. The first stage isn't so bad, but the second is where the game decides you're no longer in basic training, but instead the war zone. enemies will be relentless in attacking you. Many of them have guns of some sort, and you need to somehow maneuver in between any projectiles to get within range to attack. This is easier than it sounds. To make things worse, some enemies will split in two when attacked, quickly filling up the screen with hostiles. Sometimes, your best strategy is just to run. The only thing I haven't covered yet is what makes the game slightly more frustrating than it needs to be. The jumping. You may be asking, well, what the hell is wrong with the jumping? Well, compared to the rest of the controls of the game, jumping feels too loose. It can be slightly harder to land exactly where you want to, and within areas that contain pitfalls, you might just want to shut the game off. Plus, if you jump and attack at the same time, it also seems like you move faster that way. I don't get it. Due to the brutal and unforgiving challenge of the game, I can admit that I didn't get very far into the game. It only has 5 levels, and each is split up into different stages, but I can't make it farther than the 3rd area. That doesn't mean that it's not a fun game though, because it is. If you like your action games that give a challenge that will test your skill, this is a good one to play. And if you get mad easily, I'd probably stay away. Final score? Let's go with 7 out of 10 on this one. This is Reaper. Happy fragging.